Good morning, Year 12. Here's another video for you. This time we are looking at Holy Thursday from Songs of Innocence. This is one of my favourites. I'm pretty sure I say that about every one of the poems, but I really mean it this time. It's in my top 10. It's an incredibly important poem, especially when we're looking at through the lens of social and political protest. This is one of the poems that deals very clearly with the institutionalised religion within Blake's contemporary society, and of course his social criticism of those that had power in his time. So let's have a look at the poem. It's important that you recognise, whilst this is a song of innocence, the criticism, the critique of the world is muted, but it's still present. And if I were you, I would pop that at the top of your poem in the anthology there. This is on page 75, Year 12, and pop there at the top. The critique is muted, but is still present. Okay, I like to use the phrase as well. It's thinly veiled, or is veiled, but we can still see it. Okay, it's still very much there, and we'll learn how in a moment. So let's talk about Holy Thursday first as the title. Holy Thursday is a purposeful title for this poem, and it refers to a specific celebration. Okay, a specific celebration within the church in Blake's time, and that was Ascension Day. Ascension Day. Okay, so it's worth writing this again next to the title of the poem. So Ascension Day was the withdrawal of Jesus to heaven 40 days after his resurrection. That would be Easter. This is a very apt poem, it being the Easter holidays, and would then mark the conclusion of his ministry on earth, okay, on his time spent on earth. So Holy Thursday, whilst it does mark a very real religious holiday, is used here by Blake ironically, okay, hugely ironically when we read the content of the poem. Okay, I mean, what are the connotations that you associate with holy or with holiness? Okay, this sense of purity, of dedication to God and the Holy Spirit, the Trinity, to a life of benevolence and serving God. Holy should have loaded positive connotations, and of course the Thursday there is referencing Ascension Day. But of course there is nothing holy. Okay, there is nothing holy about the treatment of the poor. There is nothing holy about the plight of these individuals. And there is nothing holy about the treatment of the church figures within this time, the status quo, the authority figures, with their lack of awareness and their evasion, okay, their unwillingness to acknowledge the menacing and deeply disturbing existence of these people. So this poem is full of the hypocrisies and the sort of false facade of charity that these individuals upheld at this time. Okay, so make sure you've got that at the top of your poem for a little bit of context there. Let's read it. "'Twas on a holy Thursday, their innocent faces clean, the children walking two and two in red and blue and green. Grey-headed beadles walked before with wands as white as snow, till into the high dome of pools they like Thames water flow. Oh, what a multitude they seemed, these flowers of London town. Seated in companies they sit, with radiance all their own. The hum of multitudes was there, but multitudes of lambs, thousands of little boys and girls raising their innocent hands. Now like a mighty wind they raise to heaven the voice of song, or like harmonious thunderings the seats of heaven among. Beneath them sat the aged men, wise guardians of the poor, then cherished pity lest you drive an angel from your door." Okay, now if I was going to sum this up, and I've tried to do so on this slide for you, so you can pause and make notes or just listen in and take some key snatches. we've clearly got an establishing here, a setting up of a contrast between the innocent faces, as I've put there, of the children that are present within the poem. You've got the children, their innocent faces clean, they're walking two and two in red and blue and green. I really like that start of the poem, the way that they are depicted in their angelic innocence. They seem scrubbed clean, kind of especially for this occasion. This is not their usual state. Okay, the way that these children are depicted here in their radiance, in their angelic innocence, is not their usual state. They have quite literally been scrubbed clean, adorned in matching clothing, or clothing that, complements in colour scheme one another. And they are marched in. They're walking two and two, and this reminds me, for a nice direct link to our other protest text, The Handmaid's Tale. Okay, where we have the handmaids, when they leave the house on the way to the stores to complete their chores, they are doubled. Okay, doubled, they walk down the street. A sister dripped in blood. The idea that individuality is squashed is present here. Okay, they are marched and they enter the cathedral in regimented order. So there is this sort of order, this orderly sense as they march through, that for me is suggestive of hierarchy and rigidity, this regimentation, rather than any sense of freedom, liberation, creative imagination. Okay, so a Marxist critic might see this opening use of imagery as indicative of their place within the hierarchy, and this rigid and profoundly malevolent force that in contrast, the grey-headed beadles have. Okay, so these grey-headed beadles on the 5th line of the poem, they are, as I say, the authority figures, religious authority figures that march the children through. It's no mistake that they are grey-headed. Okay, so they are aided, and we have that direct link to experience, the contraries of young, and old, of innocent and experience. So we have that contrast established at the start of the poem. Okay, but it does paint a euphemized, idealistic image of them. Okay, the children, as I said, are working together, two and two, in red and blue and green. And whenever I read that out, the rhymes there, of course, and the use of tripling, red and blue and green, the simple primary colours, it sounds very storybook. Okay, it sounds very fairy tale, and therefore idealistic, euphemized, sort of steeped in innocence and thus ignorance. Okay, but we know this is satirical. He is not doing this to paint this as a genuine nor authentic image. This is this kind of postcard pretty false illusion. The grey-headed beadles, okay, they have what's described of as wands, as white as snow. Okay, spoiler alert, year 12, that is a metaphor. Okay, the wands are not the wands that we see within Harry Potter. Okay, the plethora of wands that are used there in a magical way. They are instead rods. Okay, these are used for authority. These are used to threaten, to keep the children subdued. So just consider that, okay, in that opening image. It is on the surface an image of orderliness, of peace, of harmony, of, a religious holiday that is meant to celebrate this marking of Jesus's ministry on earth, as I said before. And yet what it really is for me is menacing. This is a menacing open image, because what we have here is the children being marched through, being bound and contained. We have the threat of the rods, and then when they enter St. Paul's, they're described as moving like Thames water flows. And all I get there is not an image of tranquility and free movement, but instead an image of them being forced or led in this straight line, like lambs to the slaughter. Okay, so that's there. Where are we? So just going back to what I've got on here on the board, they even make the red and blue and green of their school uniforms look like flowers of London town. So we've got that metaphor, that euphemization again, and the boys and girls raise their hands and their voices to heaven. Right, this happens in the end of the third and the beginning of the fourth stanza. This is when the children sing. Okay, thousands of little boys and girls raising their innocent hands. So up they go like a mighty wind. They raise to heaven the voice of song. Okay, so these children, despite their exploitation, despite their plight, they raise their hands and voices to heaven, and the narrator imagines them rising up to heaven too, just like Christ did on Ascension Day. So they're resilient, these children, once again. Okay, we've got connections to the little vagabond here. They are resilient children despite their plight. The Holy Spirit seems to shine through them. They're not frail or meek or mild, because their voices, when combined together, are powerful. Okay, they're a mighty wind. Maybe you could see their voices, when joined together, as a metaphor for collective rebellion. The power of people when they unify against the status quo. So the children are only powerful when they raise to heaven together their voice of song. It's harmonious thundering. So you have that as well, which is quite interesting. The problem that I have, though, is straight after this moment, these harmonious thunderings, beneath them sit the aged men, the wise guardians of the poor. So the poem ends with the supervised aged beadles, the church officials or ushers. And by ending with them, the poetic voice is urging you to remember that they have the final word. They have the final say. They are what remains, the image that the reader is left with. And then, the Blake, really, because that's who it is, he wants you to dwell on them, on their hypocrisies, on their false appearances. Okay, obviously wise guardians is men in the hugest sense as satirical. Okay, it is not an aptronym. It doesn't suit who they are and their identity. So obviously, in the contrary songs of Innocence Holy Thursday, which we'll deal with in the next video, we have a much more overt social criticism. And I just wanted to give you this line here from that poem. And so many children poor, it is a land of poverty. That's how the other poem ends, in a way. And what we're left here is the idea of angels and, cherishing pity in your heart. Remember that pity, peace and love, those qualities. And those qualities, unfortunately, have no place in this world of neglect and institutionalized failure to create true charity. Okay, so you've got the illustrated version on the right hand side. You can see the beadles with their wands at the top, the children in regimented order. I mean, you can even see in the illustration they have no facial features. They're very blurred. They look completely uniform. They're all the same height. Okay, so again, that lack of individualism is there too. Okay, enough of me for a minute, because I think we need to take a pause. This is a complex poem. There's a lot going on. Hopefully you've paused throughout to digest, to take note. But I want you to have a little go at an activity. So on each slide that's about to show up, and I'm not going to say too much throughout, I'm just going to move the slides forward. I need you to pause at each different slide, and you are going to match the three aspects here. These are going to work as your annotations for this poem. Okay, so it's more guided annotations this time. So you've got three structural techniques on the left hand side in the blue. Okay, so that's your three structural techniques, the three 4-line stanzas, the three 4-line stanzas that are present within there, although they're kind of paired lines. So when I say line, I mean kind of like you've got to do the two, so it's 2, 2, 2. Okay, so the stanzas, okay, look at the stanzas, the rhyme and the rhythm, okay? So if you look at something like, "'Twas on a holy Thursday, the innocent face is clean," that's 1. "The children walking 2 and 2 in red and blue and green," that's 2. "Grey-headed beadles walk before with wands as white as snow," that's your 3. And then till on into the high dome of pools, daylight Thames waters flow. So that's what I mean by the kind of, let's call them sentences, 3, 4, sort of 4 sentence stanzas. okay, instead. Rhyme and rhythm. You're going to match it up to the example in the yellow. That's the example. I've color coded it for you. And then the analysis or the explanation is in the green. Okay, so you want to find it in your poem for the left hand side. Then you've got the quote and the analysis. You're just matching them up. If you want to do this directly on the poem, completely up to you. If you want to write this all out in your book and have like a series of notes that you can later add, again, completely up to you. But let's give you a couple of minutes on this first one. Pause the video, get matching, get noting. Okay, welcome back. Let's do the second one. So again, this time we've got a generic feature or a sort of a meaning that the poem could convey, connecting that to an example from the poem in the yellow and then the analysis in the green. So we've got the idea, the concept of children in innocence, society and its hypocrisy, and the ample use of biblical reference within the poem. Okay, so go ahead again, pause it, have a go in your books, in your anthologies, off we go. Okay, carrying on through, welcome back again. This time we have imagery. Okay, another key author's method for AO2. We have the imagery that's used to convey children, purity, innocence, them being like angels. Secondly, the imagery associated with the old men. And then lastly, the imagery associated with the choir of children. Okay, it's pretty easy to match them to the examples in this one, but do make sure that you match it to the correct explanation. Okay, couple of minutes, get pausing. And here we go. I believe this is one of the last ones anyway. This time we are looking at language. Notice I didn't start with language because at A level we don't really start there. We start with the bigger building blocks of analysis, structure, imagery, author's intention and meaning. But we're back with language. This time we have use of metaphor, which is quite ample within the poem, a simile, and irony and satire, which is obviously saturated by that. So there's lots too. 3 key quotes, can you match them? 3 points of analysis. I've given you with the red there just a little bit of contextual knowledge for that biblical reference that you might need to pop down as well. Okay, so give yourself a little bit longer for this one because of that. 3, 2, 1, get matching. Okay, right, this is the last one. I remember now. Here's the last one. This one we end with the effects on the reader. So I've given a range of effects on the left-hand side, but I've paired them. So the first response that you might have is the evocation of pity or moral obligation. Moral obligation means that you, the reader, feel that morally in your heart of hearts, you have some responsibility here to help remedy this situation. On the other half, we have anger or moral anxiety, okay, that, you know, this isn't wrong and it needs to change. And there's that sort of sense of outrage in that second half, okay, a little bit easier, just 2 examples to pick from and just 2 points of analysis. Off you go, pause the video. Okay, welcome back. So hopefully at this point you have a range of ideas. I'm just going to go back to the first one and I just want to reassure you that once you've got all of those notes down and you've matched them from the video, your poem really will be quite annotated and quite covered. The only thing I wanted to say before I end this video is that the context of the poem, which isn't on a slide here, so let me explain, is fairly brief, just for the general gist. So let me just mention it now. So what you need to know is that within Blake's time there were charity schools, okay? So such a thing as charity schools. Now they were funded very much by public donations and their purpose was to provide care and education for orphaned children, okay, for orphaned children. And every year it was said that on Ascension Day, these charity schools, and I keep saying that in a really loaded way, but I mean it, right? They took their children, the orphans, to a special service within St. Paul's, within the heart of London. Notice the setting again, London. And for Thanksgiving, a special service of Thanksgiving, in the cathedral, and that of course was Holy Thursday, Ascension Day. And that is the backdrop for this poem. That is what he has chosen. I think it's just a genius selection. It involves children, it involves the most vulnerable, children who are orphans, okay, quite literally wronged in so many ways, and it involves the church and the church's treatment of the most vulnerable. So this is clearly why it's one of my key poems. Okay, the end result of this poem it really shines a light on the damaging ramifications of institutionalized charity, which doesn't actually solve anything. The charity here in this poem is futile, and all it does is conceal a whole regime of neglect. Okay, so going back to where I started this video in a nice cyclical structure here, year 12, the critique of this poem is muted but is still very much present. Okay, it is the purest example of satire in the whole collection. And of course, in its paired poem, Holy Thursday of Experience, we will see that those muted tones scrubbed away for something much more overt and clear, something much more obvious. So if I were you, once you finish this video, I would sit down, grab a new cue card and really summarize this poem, because there's been a lot of information here. Maybe listen to this video again if you need to, without doing the activities again, and just make sure this is nice and clear, because this is such a pure example of social criticism within Blake's work, within his canon, and you just can't go without this. Okay, this is the heart of everything. Okay, so that's all there is for today, year 12. Once again, I hope you're well. If you need anything, please email me, never hesitate to, I'll be right back. And I'm hoping you're enjoying this. I know this isn't exactly how I thought it would be. I love Blake, it's one of my favourite things to teach you, but I'm also enjoying making these videos for you, and I'm really glad that you're checking in, you're commenting, I know that you're there and that you're working through them happily. So well done to you, enjoy your Easter. Just like the last video, you may choose to complete this or may hold off, but I always think it's nice to keep busy whilst you're at home. Okay.